The sky over Montana hung low and heavy on the afternoon of November 14th, 2019. The kind of sky that pressed down on everything beneath it, turning the world grey and small. The kind of sky that made people close their curtains and turn up their heaters and forget about anyone who might be standing outside. Wren Calloway was standing outside. She was 16 years old, and she had exactly $47 in her pocket, a backpack with 3 changes of clothes and her mother's photograph wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it dry. Her brother Finch stood beside her, 10 years old and shivering, his hand gripping the leash of a golden retriever named Copper. The dog's tail hung low. Even he seemed to understand that something terrible had just happened. Behind them, the door of the house on Pine Ridge Road was already closed. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place still echoed in Wren's ears. Such a small sound, such a final one. Their Uncle Vance had not even looked at them when he said the words. He had stared at the floor, at the bottle in his hand, at anything except the faces of his dead brother's children. "I can't do this anymore," he had said. "Bills are piling up. I got my own problems. You're old enough to figure something out." Wren had wanted to argue. She had opened her mouth to say that she would get a job, that she would cook and clean and stay out of his way, that she just needed a few more months until she turned 17 and could legally work full-time. But the words had died in her throat when she saw his eyes. There was nothing there. No guilt, no hesitation, no room for negotiation. He had already decided, and now here they were. 2 children and a dog standing on a gravel driveway as the first drops of cold November rain began to fall. Finch tugged at her sleeve. "Wren, where are we going?" She looked down at her brother. His face was pale, his eyes too wide. He had looked like that for 8 months now, ever since the morning their mother had stopped breathing. Some part of him had frozen that day, and Wren did not know how to thaw it. "Somewhere safe," she said. "Where?" She did not answer. Because the truth was complicated, and Finch was only 10, and some truths were too heavy for children to carry. The truth was this: Wren knew exactly where they were going, but she also knew that if she told anyone, if she walked into the police station or called the social services number printed on the card their school counselor had given her, they would take Copper away. Foster homes did not accept dogs. Group homes did not accept dogs. The system that was supposed to help children like them had no room for a 60-pound golden retriever with one ear that never stood up straight and eyes that looked at Finch.
"I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to keep you safe. And this tree is going to help me do it."
Like he was the most important person in the world. Wren had made a promise to her mother. She had held Miranda Calloway's hand in that hospital room, felt the bones beneath skin that had grown too thin, and she had promised that she would keep the family together. All of them. Including the dog that had been her father's last gift before the logging accident that killed him 3 years ago. She was not going to break that promise. "Come on," she said to Finch. "We need to walk." They walked. The town of Crestwood was not large. It had 1 main street, 1 grocery store, 1 gas station, and 1 man named Garrett Holbrook who owned the convenience store and seemed to know everything about everyone. Wren kept her head down as they passed the storefronts, hoping no one would notice them, hoping no one would ask questions. No one did. That was the thing about being invisible. Once people decided you did not matter, they stopped seeing you entirely. The Calloway children had stopped mattering the moment their mother's coffin went into the ground. They were orphans now, a problem to be solved, a burden to be passed along until someone else's conscience could carry the weight. The sidewalk ended at the edge of town. Beyond it, a dirt road curved into the trees, and beyond the trees, the mountains rose up like sleeping giants beneath their blankets of evergreen. Wren had walked this road before, many times, with her mother beside her, pointing out the plants that were safe to eat and the ones that would make you sick, teaching her how to read the sky and the wind and the silence between the trees. "Mom used to take me here," Wren said quietly. "She showed me things." Finch looked up at the forest. "It's dark in there. Not if you know where to look." They left the road behind. The forest swallowed them slowly, one step at a time. The rain fell harder, finding its way through the canopy in cold, scattered drops. Copper walked between the children, his nose working, his ears alert. He had been in these woods before, too. He remembered the smells. Wren led them down a narrow trail that most people would not even recognize as a trail. It wound through thick underbrush, over fallen logs, across a creek that was already beginning to swell with rainwater. Finch slipped once, and Wren caught him, and they kept walking. An hour passed, then two. The light was fading when Wren finally stopped. Ahead of them, rising from the forest floor like something out of a fairy tale, stood the largest tree Finch had ever seen. Its trunk was massive, easily 8 feet across, covered in rough bark that looked like the skin of some ancient creature. Its branches spread out above them like arms reaching for the sky, and at its base, where the roots clawed into the earth, there was an opening. Not a hole, not a crack. An opening, curved and smooth like a doorway that had been shaped by time rather than hands. Finch stared. "What is that?" Wren walked forward and touched the bark. Her fingers traced the rough surface, and something in her chest loosened, something that had been clenched tight since the moment Uncle Vance had closed the door. "This is where we're going to live," she said. Finch did not move. "Inside a tree? Inside this tree?" Wren turned to look at him. "Mom brought me here when I was 12. She said this tree was over 400 years old. She said the inside rotted out a long time ago, but the outside is still alive."
Trust is earned, not given.
But I want you to know something. You're not alone.
Still strong, she said if I ever needed shelter, if I ever had nowhere else to go, I should come here. "Why?" Wren's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with something Finch could not name. "Because this tree saved her life once, and she said it would save mine too." She ducked through the opening and disappeared into the darkness. Finch stood alone in the rain, the forest pressing in around him, his sister's dog sitting at his feet. For a long moment he did not move. He thought about the house on Pine Ridge Road, about the bed he would never sleep in again, about the way Uncle Vance had not even said goodbye. Then Copper nudged his hand with a cold, wet nose, and Finch followed his sister into the tree. The inside of the hollow was larger than Finch had expected. The walls curved upward around them, smooth and reddish in the fading light that filtered through cracks near the top. The floor was soft with decades of fallen debris, leaves and bark and the dust of years. It smelled like wood and earth, old and clean and somehow safe. Wren was already moving, pulling things from her backpack, spreading her jacket on the ground. "It's dry," she said, almost to herself. "The bark directs the water down the outside. Mum showed me. The rain never gets in." Finch sat down heavily, his back against the curved wall. Copper curled up beside him, and the warmth of the dog's body was the first good thing Finch had felt all day. "We can't live in a tree," he said. "Why not?" "Because," he struggled for words, "because people don't live in trees, because it's cold, because someone will find us and take us away." Wren knelt in front of him. Her face was serious, but not unkind. She looked so much like their mother in that moment that Finch's throat tightened. "Listen to me," she said. "If we go to the police, if we tell anyone what happened, they're going to put us in foster care. And foster care doesn't take dogs. You know that. They'll take Copper to the shelter, and we'll never see him again." Finch's arms tightened around the dog. "I made a promise to Mum," Wren continued. "I promised I would keep us together, all of us. And I'm not going to break that promise. Not for Uncle Vance, not for the police, not for anyone." She reached out and touched his face, brushing the hair from his eyes the way their mother used to do. "I know it's scary. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to keep you safe, and this tree is going to help me do it." Finch looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Copper, who was watching him with those steady, trusting eyes. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." Wren smiled. It was a small smile, tired and fragile, but it was real. "Try to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow we start building." That night, the rain fell hard against the bark of the ancient oak, and inside 3 small figures huddled together in the darkness. A girl who had promised to be strong, a boy who was trying to be brave, and a dog who did not understand what had happened, but who knew with absolute certainty that his people needed him to stay close. Above them, the tree creaked softly in the wind, a sound like an old ship settling at sea. It had stood in this forest for 400 years. It had survived storms and droughts and the slow march of time. And now, for reasons it could not comprehend, it had become a home. Morning came slowly inside the hollow. Wren woke to the sound of dripping water and the soft rhythm of Copper's breathing. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the curved wood against her back, smelled the earth beneath her, and everything came rushing back. She sat up carefully, trying not to wake Finch. Her brother was still asleep, his head resting on Copper's flank, his face peaceful in a way it rarely was when he was awake. She let him rest. Outside, the forest was washed and quiet. Fog drifted between the trees in pale ribbons, and the air was sharp with the smell of wet pine. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, but the cold remained, pressing against her skin like a warning. Winter was coming. Wren knew this. She had known it when she made the decision to walk into the forest instead of walking into the police station. She had known that November in Montana was only the beginning, that December and January and February would bring cold that could kill, that snow and ice and wind would test everything she thought she knew about survival. But she also knew something else, something her mother had taught her in those long walks through these very woods, pointing out plants and tracks and the
Because you know what you're doing. And because someone taught you well.
secrets hidden in plain sight. She knew how to survive. It started that first day with water. The creek was a 10-minute walk from the tree, and Wren marked the trail by bending branches, creating signs only she would recognize. She brought back water in the empty bottles from her backpack, and she taught Finch how to find the creek on his own. Then came food. The forest was not generous in November, but it was not empty either. Wren knew where to find the last of the autumn berries, the ones that clung stubbornly to their stems even as the first frost threatened. She knew which roots were safe to dig up, which plants could be eaten raw and which needed to be cooked. She set simple snares along the rabbit trails she remembered from her walks with her mother, and on the third day, one of them worked. Finch had cried when he saw the rabbit, limp and still in the wire loop. Wren had not let herself cry. She had cleaned the animal with steady hands, the way her mother had shown her, and she had cooked it over a small fire built in a pit outside the tree. They had eaten every bite, and Copper had crunched the bones, and that night Finch had slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The tree itself became the center of everything. Wren studied it the way a carpenter studies a house, looking for weaknesses and strengths. She found that the opening faced south, away from the prevailing wind. She found that the bark directed rainwater down and away, keeping the interior dry. She found that the walls, though hollow, were still 10 inches thick in most places, and that the wood held the day's warmth long after the sun went down. She made improvements. She dug a shallow trench around the base of the tree, angling it to carry water away from the entrance. She wove branches into a screen that could be placed across the opening at night, blocking the wind while still allowing air to flow. She layered dry leaves on the floor, 8 inches deep, creating insulation against the cold ground. Finch helped where he could. He gathered leaves and carried water, and watched his sister work with a mixture of awe and confusion. "How do you know all this?" he asked one afternoon, as Wren was sealing cracks in the wall with a mixture of mud and moss. "Mum taught me." "When?" Wren paused, her hands still pressed against the wall. "Before she got sick, she used to bring me out here almost every weekend. She said it was important to know how to take care of yourself. She said you never knew when you might need it." She did not tell him the rest. She did not tell him that their mother had been preparing her for exactly this moment, as if she had somehow known that the cancer would come, that Uncle Vance would fail them, that someday her daughter would need to remember everything she had been taught. She did not tell him about the box. She had found it on the second day, hidden in a natural crevice in the wall of the hollow, a small tin box rusted at the edges but still sealed tight. Inside was a folded piece of paper, soft with age, covered in her mother's handwriting. A map. It showed the forest around the tree, marked with careful symbols. A circle for the creek, an X for a patch of cattails with edible roots, a square for a rocky overhang where dry wood could be found even after rain. And in one corner, written in letters so small Wren had to squint to read them, a note. "This place saved me when I was 14. It will save you, too. If you need help, find Edna Birchwood. She lives at the edge of the forest on Miller Road. She knows the truth." Wren had read those words a dozen times. She had not gone to find Edna Birchwood, not yet, but she had memorized the map, and she had used it, and every day surviving got a little bit easier. A week passed, then 2. The hollow tree became a home. Not a comfortable home, not a warm home, but a home nonetheless. Wren carved a shallow groove into the wall to hold their water bottles. She hung their extra clothes on a knot in the wood to keep them off the damp floor. She created a small shelf from a piece of bark wedged into a natural crack where they could store the food they had gathered. Finch stopped asking when they were going back to town. He stopped asking about school, about his friends, about the life they had left behind. Instead, he started asking different questions. "Can I try setting the snare today? Will you show me which berries are safe? How did you know the rabbit would come this way?" Wren answered every question. She taught him the way their mother had taught her, patiently and thoroughly, because she understood now why Miranda Calloway had spent so many weekends in this forest. It was not just about survival. It was about passing something down, something that could not be taken away by death or betrayal or the slamming of a door. Knowledge was the only inheritance that could never be lost. But even as the hollow tree sheltered them, even as Wren and Finch settled into their strange new life, the world outside was beginning to notice. Let me ask you something. If you were Wren, 16 years old and responsible for your little brother, what would you do? Would you have gone to the police and taken the chance of losing Copper forever? Or would you have walked into the forest and trusted that the knowledge your mother gave you would be enough to keep you alive? Think about it. There are no wrong answers, only the choices we make and the reasons we make them. The first rumor started with smoke, a thin grey trail rising above the trees, visible from the old logging road that curved along the edge of the forest. A hunter saw it first, then mentioned it at the gas station, and by that evening everyone in Crestwood was talking. "Someone's camping out there," said the woman at the grocery store. "Probably homeless," said the man at the post office. "Heard it's those Callaway kids," said Garrett Holbrook, leaning against the counter of his convenience store with the certainty of a man who knew everything about everyone. "The ones whose mother died. Uncle kicked them out a couple weeks back." The word spread through town the way words always do in small places, passed from mouth to mouth, growing and changing with each telling. "They're living in the woods like animals. That girl thinks she can survive a Montana winter. She's 16. Someone should call the police." Deputy Corbin Webb got the call on a Tuesday morning. He was a serious man, careful and methodical, and he did not like loose ends. 2 children living in the forest was a very large loose end. He drove out to the edge of the woods that afternoon, parked his car on the old logging road, and walked into the trees. He did not find the children. The forest was too big and he did not know where to look, but he found signs of them. A trail that was too clear to be made by animals, the remains of a small fire carefully extinguished, a snare cleverly set along a rabbit run. He stood there for a long time, looking at the snare, thinking about the kind of person who would know how to build something like that. Then he walked back to his car and made a call. "They're out here," he said. "Somewhere. But they're not lost. Whoever's running this
If we can survive this, we can survive anything.
knows what they're doing." Garrett Holbrook was less impressed. "Those kids are building their own graves out there," he said to anyone who would listen. "A tree is not a shelter. First real cold snap, they'll be crawling back to town. If they're lucky. If they're not lucky, we'll find them in the spring." He said it loudly, with the confidence of a man who had lived in Crestwood for 40 years and believed that experience made him an expert on everything. He said it in the diner and the hardware store and the church parking lot after Sunday service. And the town believed him. Inside the hollow tree, Wren heard none of this. She did not know that the town was talking about her, that bets were being placed on how long she would last, that Deputy Corbin Webb was drawing up plans for a search party. She only knew that the temperature was dropping. She only knew that winter was coming. And she only knew that she had promised to keep her family together, no matter what it cost. The 3rd week brought the first test. Wren woke before dawn to a world transformed. Frost covered every surface outside the tree, turning the forest into a landscape of white lace and crystal. Her breath came out in visible clouds, and when she touched the bark at the entrance, it burned with cold. Finch was still asleep, curled tight against Copper, both of them breathing slow and steady. Wren watched them for a moment, then slipped outside to assess. The temperature had dropped overnight, from the mid-30s to somewhere around 20 degrees. Not dangerous, not yet, but a warning of what was to come. She spent that day reinforcing everything. She wove a thicker screen for the entrance using branches from a Douglas fir that still held their needles. She dug the floor of the hollow down another 6 inches, knowing that the earth below the frost line held a steady temperature of around 55 degrees, heat that would rise and warm them as they slept. She gathered more firewood than they could possibly need, stacking it in a natural overhang she had found 50 yards from the tree, where it would stay dry even in rain or snow. Finch worked beside her without complaint. He was stronger now than he had been 2 weeks ago, his arms lean with new muscle, his movements quicker and more confident. The forest was changing him in ways Wren could see and ways she could not. "Wren," he said, as they walked back to the tree with armloads of wood. "Yeah? Do you think we could really do this? Live here all winter?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "Mum did it once, when she was about your age. She lived in this tree for almost 3 months." Finch stopped walking. "She did? That's what the note said. The one in the box. But why?" Wren set down her wood and faced her brother. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright with curiosity instead of fear. It was a good look on him. "I don't know the whole story," she admitted. "But something happened to her when she was 14. Something that made her need a place to hide. And this tree kept her alive. That's why she taught me about it. That's why she made sure I knew everything." Finch was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, picked up his wood, and kept walking. He did not ask any more questions that day. But Wren could see him looking at the tree differently after that, touching the bark with something like reverence, as if he understood now that they were part of a story that had started long before they were born. The first believer appeared on a Wednesday. Wren was alone checking the snares along the rabbit trail when she heard footsteps behind her. She froze, her hand going to the small knife in her belt, every muscle tensed for flight. But the footsteps stopped, and a voice called out, soft and creaking with age, "Don't run, child. I'm not here to hurt you." Wren turned. An old woman stood on the trail 20 feet away. She was small, hunched slightly with arthritis, wrapped in a heavy wool coat that looked older than Wren's mother would have been. Her face was weathered but kind, and her eyes were sharp and clear, studying Wren with an expression that held no pity and no judgment. "You're the Calloway girl," the woman said. "Miranda's daughter." Wren did not move. "Who are you?" "My name is Edna Birchwood." A small smile crossed the weathered face. "I believe your mother left a note about me." Something in Wren's chest loosened just a little. She did not lower her guard, but she did not run either. "How did you find us?" "I've lived at the edge of this forest for 50 years, Edna said. "I know every tree, every trail, every sign of life or death. A girl and a boy and a dog do not pass through my woods without me knowing." She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small cloth bag. "I brought food, bread, cheese, some dried apples." She set the bag on the ground, stepped back, and folded her hands in front of her. "I know you don't trust anyone right now. You shouldn't. Trust is earned, not given. But I want you to know something, Wren Calloway." She paused and her voice softened. "That tree you're living in, it saved my life once too. A long time ago when I was young and foolish and had nowhere else to go. Your mother found me there. She was just a girl herself, not much older than you are now. She helped me, and later I helped her." Wren's throat was tight. "Helped her with what?" Edna's eyes were steady. "That's a story for another time, when you're ready to hear it. For now, just know that you're not alone, and you're not doing anything wrong. You're surviving, and surviving is the most important thing a person can do." She nodded once, then turned and began walking back the way she had come. "Mrs. Birchwood?" Wren called. The old woman stopped, but did not turn around. "Thank you." A long pause, then quietly. "Take care of your brother. Take care of the dog. And when you need help, come find me. I'll be waiting." She disappeared into the trees, and Wren was alone again. But the bag of food was still there, and the weight of it in her hands felt like proof that the world was not entirely cold. The second believer came 3 days later. His name was Jonas Reinholdt, and he was a logger, born in Norway but living in Montana for 20 years. He was a quiet man, not given to gossip, and he had listened without comment as the people of Crestwood talked about the children in the woods. But he had noticed something they had not. The snares along the rabbit trails were set with a Scandinavian technique he had not seen since his childhood in Bergen. The fire pits were built in the old way, with stones arranged to reflect heat and channel smoke. The shelter at the base of the ancient oak was reinforced with methods that came from his grandmother's generation, from a time before electricity and central heating, and the arrogance of modern convenience. Someone had taught that girl, someone who knew the old ways. He did not approach her directly. He understood the value of space, the importance of letting wild things come to trust you on their own terms. Instead, he left gifts at the edge of the clearing where the great tree stood. A small knife, sharper than anything she could have brought from town. A length of rope, strong enough to hold twice her weight. A package of waterproof matches. A jar of rendered fat, which could be used for cooking or for sealing cracks against the cold. He left no note. He did not need to. The gifts spoke for themselves. On the fourth visit, as he was placing a bundle of dried fish near the entrance of the hollow, he heard a voice behind him. "Why are you helping us?" He turned. The girl was standing at the edge of the trees, a knife in her hand, her posture ready for fight or flight. But her eyes were curious, not afraid. Jonas straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Because you know what you're doing," he said, "and because someone taught you well. I don't know who, but I recognize the methods. They come from the old country, from people who understood that nature is not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be respected." Wren was silent for a long moment. Then she lowered the knife. "My mother taught me." "Then your mother was a wise woman." "She's dead." Jonas nodded. There was no pity in his expression, only understanding. "I'm sorry, but her knowledge lives in you, and as long as it lives, she is not entirely gone." He picked up the bundle of fish and held it out to her. "Take this, feed your brother, and know that there is at least one person in that town who does not think you are crazy." Wren took the fish. Her hands were steadier than they had been a month ago, calloused and strong. "The others," she said. "The ones who think we're going to die out here. What do they say?" Jonas's expression did not change. "They say many things, most of them foolish, but words cannot keep you warm, and words cannot fill your belly. Let them talk. You have more important work to do." He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the logging road. Wren watched him go, the bundle of fish heavy in her hands, and for the first time since her mother's funeral, she felt something other
I was wrong about everything. I was wrong.
Rather than fear and determination, she felt hope. But for every believer, there were a dozen skeptics. Garrett Holbrook was the loudest of them. He talked about the Callaway children every day to every customer with the relentless certainty of a man who had never been wrong about anything. "Those kids are building their own graves out there," he said, leaning against his counter with his arms crossed. "I've lived in Montana my whole life. I know what winter does to people who aren't prepared, and a 16-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy are not prepared." Deputy Corbin Webb was more measured, but no less certain. "A tree is not a shelter," he said at the weekly town council meeting. "It's a death trap. One good snowstorm, one real cold snap, and those kids will be in serious trouble. We need to bring them in before something happens." Councilwoman Opaline Mercer, a severe woman of 62 who had served on the council for 15 years, nodded gravely. "We have a legal responsibility. If those children die, the town could be held liable. We should have brought them in weeks ago." She was already drafting the paperwork for a forced intervention, already calculating the political cost of inaction versus the political cost of dragging 2 orphaned children out of the forest against their will. Beckett Tanner, a young man of 22 who worked at the sawmill and spent his evenings at the bar, found the whole thing hilarious. $10 says they don't make it to Christmas," he announced one night, slapping the money down on the counter. "Any takers?" There were takers. The betting pool grew throughout November as the temperature dropped and the days shortened and everyone waited for the inevitable collapse. No one was betting on the children. In the 3rd week of November, Wren allowed herself to think they might actually make it. The hollow was warm now, or at least warm enough. She had refined her techniques, sealing every crack, layering the floor with insulation, building the screen at the entrance thick enough to block the wind while still allowing ventilation. On nights when the temperature dropped into the 20s, the inside of the tree stayed in the mid-40s. Cold, yes, but not deadly. Not with 3 bodies pressed together, sharing heat. Finch was thriving in a way that surprised her. He had lost the pallor he had carried since their mother's death, replaced by a healthy color from long hours outdoors. He had learned to check the snares, to identify edible plants, to build a fire that burned hot and clean. He talked more now, laughed more, slept without the nightmares that had haunted him for months. Copper, too, seemed happier than he had been in the cramped house on Pine Ridge Road. He had room to run, squirrels to chase, a job to do, guarding the entrance of the hollow. His coat grew thicker as the cold deepened, nature's way of adapting to the environment. They were surviving. They were, against all odds, actually surviving. But Wren knew better than to celebrate too soon. She had memorized the weather patterns, the signs of changing pressure, the color of the sky that meant a storm was coming. She had heard the old-timers at the hardware store talking about winters past, about blizzards that killed livestock and froze engines and turned the world into a white prison. The test was coming. She could feel it. On November the 28th, Celia Marsh appeared at the edge of the clearing. Celia was 17, a year older than Wren, with dark hair and nervous hands, and a reputation for being too kind for her own good. She had been in Wren's English class before everything fell apart. They had never been close, but Celia had been one of the only people at school who had said anything kind after Miranda Calloway's funeral. Now she stood at the edge of the trees, holding a plastic bag and looking like she might bolt at any moment. Wren watched her from the entrance of the hollow for a full minute before stepping out. "Celia!" The other girl jumped. Ren, I didn't, I mean, I wasn't sure if, how did you find us? I followed the logging road until I saw smoke. It took me 3 tries. Celia held out the bag with trembling hands. I brought food and a blanket and some medicine in case you need it. My mum doesn't know. No one knows. I heard what people are saying, and I thought, she trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. I thought someone should care. Wren took the bag. Inside was a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a thick wool blanket, and a small first aid kit. Simple things, precious things. Thank you, she said. Celia wiped her eyes. Are you really going to stay out here all winter? Yes. Aren't you scared? Wren considered the question. Every day. But being scared and giving up are not the same thing. Celia nodded slowly as if this was something she needed to learn. Will you let me come back? Bring more supplies? You could get in trouble if anyone finds out. I know. Celia's chin lifted slightly. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. For the first time in weeks, Wren smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. Come on Saturdays, early morning, before anyone's awake. Leave the supplies at the big rock on the north side of the clearing. Don't come to the tree directly. And if anyone asks where you've been, lie. Celia nodded, her expression determined. I can do that. She turned to go, then stopped. Wren? For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. Then she was gone, disappearing into the trees, and Wren was left holding a bag of food and wondering how it was possible to feel so alone and so supported at the same time. Now I want you to pause and think about something. Wren had every reason to turn Celia away, every reason to trust no one, to keep her walls up, to protect herself and her brother from a world that had already betrayed them once. But she didn't. She accepted the help. She allowed herself to believe that not everyone was an enemy. Do you think she was right to do that? Or do you think she was taking a risk that could have destroyed everything? Sometimes the hardest part of survival isn't fighting the cold, it's deciding who to let in from the cold. December came like a warning. The first week brought a series of light snowfalls dusting the forest in white, transforming the landscape into something out of a Christmas card. Wren used the time to make final preparations. She stockpiled firewood until the cache under the rocky overhang was packed tight. She reinforced the entrance screen until it could withstand winds of 50 miles per hour. She lined the inside of the hollow with an extra layer of bark, creating a dead air space that would provide additional insulation. Finch helped with everything. He no longer needed to be told what to do. He anticipated tasks, worked independently, made decisions that showed a growing understanding of their situation. He was not the frightened boy who had stood on the gravel driveway 2 months ago. He was something new, something stronger. Copper sensed the change in the weather before anyone else. He grew restless as December progressed, pacing the entrance of the hollow, whining at sounds only he could hear. Animals always knew when something bad was coming. They felt it in their bones. On December the 10th, Edna Birchwood appeared at the clearing again. She looked worried. It was the first time Wren had seen anything other than calm certainty on her weathered face. There's a storm coming, Edna said without preamble. A big one. The Weather Service is calling it an Arctic outbreak. Temperatures could drop to 35 below, maybe worse. Wren felt the words like a physical weight. 35 below. In conditions like that, exposed skin could freeze in minutes. Hypothermia could set in within an hour, even with all her preparations, even with everything her mother had taught her. She did not know if the hollow could protect them from cold that severe. "When?" she asked. 3 days, maybe 4. Edna's eyes were steady. "You should come with me, both of you. My house isn't much, but it has walls and a furnace and a door that locks." And it was the first time anyone had offered them a real alternative, the first time anyone had given them a way out that did not involve losing copper, losing each other, losing everything they had built. Wren thought about it. She thought about the warmth of a real house, the safety of walls that did not creak in the wind, the comfort of a bed that was not the floor of a hollow tree. Then she thought about what would happen if someone saw them, if someone reported them, if the system that had already failed them once got another chance to tear them apart. "No," she said. "Thank you, but no." Edna did not argue. She simply nodded, as if she had expected this answer. "Then at least take this." She held out a small object wrapped in cloth. "It's a radio. Old, but it works. Keep it tuned to the weather station, and if things get bad, if things get really bad, come to me. Promise me you'll come to me." Wren took the radio. It was heavy in her hands, heavier than it looked. "I promise." Edna held her gaze for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched Wren's face, gently, the way a grandmother might touch a grandchild she loved. "You have her eyes," Edna said softly. "Your mother." She had the same determination, the same stubbornness. A pause, the same courage. Then she turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller among the trees until the forest swallowed her whole. Wren watched her go, the radio clutched against her chest, and for reasons she could not explain, her eyes were burning. That night, Wren sat with the radio pressed to her ear, listening to the weather forecasts with growing unease. The storm was coming faster than expected. The temperatures would be lower than first predicted. The wind would be stronger, the snow heavier, the danger more severe. She looked at Finch, asleep beside Copper, and she made a decision. She would not tell him how bad it was going to be. She would not burden him with fear he could not do anything about. Instead, she would prepare. She would do everything in her power to make sure they survived, and then she would trust the tree. For the next 2 days, she worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She tripled the insulation on the floor. She wove a second screen for the entrance, even thicker than the first. She carried firewood until her arms shook and her back ached, and she could barely stand. She sealed every crack she could find with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal fat that Jonas had given her. Finch watched her with growing concern. "Wren? What's wrong?" "Nothing, just making sure we're ready." "Ready for what?" She knelt beside him and took his hands. "A storm is coming, a big one. It's going to be very cold, and it's going to last for several days. But we're going to be okay. The tree is going to protect us." "How do you know?" "Because Mum said so. Because this tree has been standing for 400 years, and it's survived storms worse than this. And because I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. "I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Finch nodded against her shoulder. "Good. Now help me carry one more load of wood, and then we wait." The storm arrived on Friday, December the 13th. It began gently, almost peacefully. Snow started falling around noon, light and steady, turning the world white and soft and quiet. By mid-afternoon, the flakes were thicker. By evening, they were driven sideways by a wind that howled through the trees like something alive. Inside the hollow, wren and finch and copper huddled together, listening to the radio as the weatherman's voice crackled through the static. Temperatures falling rapidly. Expect wind chills of 40 below or lower. This is a life-threatening event. Do not go outside unless absolutely necessary. Finch pressed closer to his sister. Wren, are we going to be okay? She put her arm around him. Yes, the tree will protect us. How do you know? Because Mum said so, and Mum was never wrong about things like this. It was not entirely true, but it was true enough. And sometimes in the darkness, when the wind was screaming and the world was trying to tear itself apart, true enough was all you had. The first night was the hardest. The temperature dropped faster than Wren had anticipated. By midnight, the radio was reporting -27 degrees, with wind chills approaching -50. The screen at the entrance of the hollow rattled and shook, and cold air seeped through despite all her preparations. But the tree held. The walls, 10 inches thick of solid oak, absorbed the cold and refused to let it pass. The earth beneath them, dug down below the frost line, radiated a steady 55 degrees of warmth. The dead air space between the bark layers acted as insulation, slowing the transfer of heat. By morning, the temperature inside the hollow had dropped to 41 degrees. Cold, uncomfortable, but survivable. Wren did not sleep that night. She sat with her back against the wall, one hand on Finch's shoulder, the other on Copper's head, and she watched the entrance with eyes that refused to close. Every creak of the tree, every gust of wind, every groan of wood under pressure made her heart race. But the tree held. In town, the story was different. Garrett Holbrook sat in his house on Maple Street as the wind tore shingles from his roof and drove snow into drifts against his door. His furnace struggled to keep up with the cold, and by Saturday morning the temperature inside had dropped to 52 degrees despite running constantly. Deputy Corbin Webb spent the night in the police station, fielding calls from people whose pipes had burst, whose roofs had collapsed, whose cars had died on roads that were impassable. Councilwoman Opaline Mercer stood at her window, watching the storm batter the town she had served for 15 years. The paperwork for the forced intervention she had been drafting sat on her desk, useless now. No one was going anywhere in this weather. Not her deputies, not the social workers, not anyone. She thought about the 2 children in the forest, and for the first time, she felt something other than bureaucratic concern. She felt fear, real fear, for them, for what she might have done too late, for what she might find when the storm was over. And Beckett Tanner, the young man who had bet $10 that the Calloway children would not survive to Christmas, sat in the bar that had closed early due to the weather and thought about the money he was certain he was going to win. No one thought about the children in the forest. Not really. They assumed what everyone had assumed from the beginning, that nature would take its course, that the cold would do what the cold always did to people who were not prepared. They were wrong. The second day of the storm was worse than the first. The radio reported temperatures of -32 degrees, wind gusts of 60 miles per hour, visibility near zero. Inside the hollow, the temperature dropped to 38 degrees. Wren could see her breath in the dim light that filtered through the cracks near the top of the tree. Finch was shivering, despite being wrapped in every piece of clothing they owned. "Tell me a story," he said through chattering teeth. Wren pulled him closer, pressed between her body and Copper's warm flank. What kind of story? About Mum? About when she lived here? Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she began. Mum was 14 when she came to this tree. She never told me why she had to leave home, but something bad happened, something that made her feel like she had nowhere to go. So she came here to this forest and she found this tree and she decided to survive. She paused, remembering the map, the note, the careful handwriting that she would never see again. It was winter when she came, January, colder than this, maybe. She didn't have the things we have. She didn't have supplies or preparation or anyone to help her. She just had herself and the knowledge she had learned from books and from watching the old-timers in town. Finch's shivering had slowed. He was listening now, his eyes fixed on her face. She almost died. More than once, but she learned. She adapted. And when spring came, she walked out of this forest stronger than she had ever been. She said it was the hardest thing she ever did, but she also said it was the most important. Why? Because it taught her that she could survive anything, that no matter what the world threw at her, no matter how cold or dark or scary things got, she had the strength to keep going. Wren looked down at her brother's face, pale in the dim light, but no longer frightened. That's what I want you to remember, Finch. Not the cold, not the storm, not the people who said we couldn't do this. I want you to remember that we did it, that when everything was against us, we survived. And if we can survive this, we can survive anything. Finch was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. I'll remember. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, 3 hearts beat steady and strong. The tree held. Think about this for a moment. A 16-year-old girl and her 10-year-old brother huddled in a hollow tree while temperatures dropped to 32 below zero. No electricity, no furnace, no adults to tell them what to do. Just the knowledge passed down from their mother and a tree that had been standing for 400 years. Does that sound like a story? It sounds impossible. But sometimes the impossible is exactly what happens when we refuse to give up. On the 3rd day, everything changed. It started with a sound, a knocking, faint at first, barely audible over the wind, then louder, more insistent. Something was hitting the bark near the entrance of the hollow. Copper's head came up, a low growl building in his throat. Wren moved to the entrance and pressed her ear against the screen. The knocking continued, accompanied now by a voice, a human voice, weak and desperate. Please, let me in, please. She knew that voice. She had heard it in the convenience store, in the diner, in the church parking lot where it had declared with absolute certainty that she and her brother were building their own graves. Garrett Holbrook. For a long moment, Wren did not move. Part of her wanted to stay silent, to let the man who had mocked her suffer the consequences of his own arrogance. He had laughed at her. He had bet against her. He had told everyone in town that she would fail. But another part of her, the part that sounded like her mother's voice, whispered something different. Don't become what they expect you to be. Don't let their cruelty make you cruel. She pulled aside the screen. Garrett Holbrook stood in the snow, barely visible through the driving white. His face was grey, his lips blue, his body shaking so violently that he could barely stand. Ice clung to his eyebrows and beard. His hands, ungloved, were the colour of old wax. He had walked 2 miles through the worst storm in 50 years. He had come to the one place he had sworn would fail. Please, he whispered. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please. Wren stepped aside. Get in. He stumbled through the entrance and collapsed on the floor of the hollow, gasping, shaking, alive only because he had somehow found the strength to keep moving. Finch stared at the man who had called them grave diggers. Then he looked at his sister. Wren, get the blanket and move closer. He needs body heat. For the next hour, they worked to save the life of a man who had bet on their deaths. They wrapped him in the wool blanket Celia had brought. They pressed their bodies against his to transfer warmth. They gave him water, a little at a time, and watched as the color slowly returned to his face. When Garrett Holbrook finally stopped shaking, when his eyes cleared, and he truly saw where he was and who had saved him, he began to cry. I called you fools, he said, his voice breaking. I told everyone you would die out here. I laughed when they took bets. And you let me in. Wren's face was unreadable. Yes. Why? Because my mother taught me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat the people who are kind to them. It's how they treat the people who aren't. Garrett stared at her. Then he nodded slowly as if something inside him had shifted, broken, and begun to reform into a new shape. I was wrong, he said again. About everything. I was wrong. I want you to stop here and think about what Wren did. She had every right to turn Garrett away, every justification. He had mocked her, doubted her, told the whole town she would fail. And yet, when he came to her door, frozen and dying, she let him in. She saved him, not because he deserved it, not because it was easy, but because that was who she chose to be. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't require the other person to earn it. It only requires us to give it. And sometimes the hardest kindness is the kindness we show to people who have shown us none. The storm continued for 2 more days. During that time, the hollow tree became something none of them had expected, a sanctuary, a gathering place, a proof of concept that everyone had said was impossible. On the 4th day, as the wind finally began to die, more people appeared at the entrance. First came the Henderson family, father, mother, 2 children. Their house on Cedar Street had lost its roof to the weight of snow. They had spent 36 hours huddled in their basement watching the temperature drop, praying for a miracle. The miracle came in the form of rumors. Someone had heard that Garrett Holbrook was alive. Someone had heard he was in the forest, in the tree, with the Calloway children. And someone had decided that if Garrett Holbrook could survive there, maybe they could too. Then came Beckett Tanner. The young man who had bet $10 on the children's deaths walked into the hollow with frostbitten fingers and tears frozen on his cheeks. His rental house had collapsed entirely. He had lost everything except the clothes on his back. Then came Celia Marsh and her mother, driven from their home by burst pipes that had flooded everything they owned. By the end of the 4th day, 10 people were crowded into the hollow tree. 10 people who had doubted, mocked, ignored, or simply not cared about the 2 children who had walked into the forest 2 months ago. And at the center of them all, quiet and capable and utterly in control, was Wren Calloway. 10 people in a hollow tree. It sounds impossible. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, not something that could happen in the 21st century. But that is exactly what happened. 10 people who had mocked, doubted, and dismissed 2 orphan children found themselves depending on those same children for survival. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it must have felt like to knock on that bark, to beg for entrance, to admit that everything you believed was wrong. And think about what it took for Wren to open that door. Not once, not twice, but again and again, for everyone who came. She organized them. She showed them how to sit to maximize body heat. She rationed the food they had brought. She explained how the tree worked, why the walls held the warmth, why the earth below kept them from freezing. She answered questions with patience and clarity, as if she had been preparing for this her whole life, which, in a way, she had. Finch sat beside her, watching his sister with something like awe. He had always known she was strong, but he had not known she was this strong. Copper moved among the refugees, tail wagging, nose nudging frightened children, providing comfort in the way only a dog can. Emma Henderson, 7 years old and silent with shock, buried her face in his fur and did not let go for hours. On the 5th day, the storm broke. The wind died, the snow stopped, the clouds parted, and brilliant winter sunlight poured through the cracks in the top of the hollow, illuminating the huddled figures within. Wren stood and moved to the entrance. She pulled aside the screen and looked out at a world transformed. Snow lay deep and smooth over everything, untouched and pristine. Trees bent under the weight of it, their branches drooping like tired arms. The forest was silent in a way she had never heard before, as if the storm had scoured away all sound and left only stillness behind. She stepped outside, her boots sinking deep, and turned to look at the tree that had saved them all. It stood tall and dark against the sky, scarred and ancient and indomitable. It had survived 400 years of storms. It had survived droughts and fires and the slow march of time. And now it had done something else. It had proven everyone wrong. The town learned the truth slowly, in pieces. Deputy Corbin Webb led the first search party into the forest on December 18th, expecting to find bodies. What he found instead was Garrett Holbrook walking out of the trees under his own power, tears streaming down his face. "They're alive," Garrett said. "All of them, 10 people, in a tree, because of those kids." Webb did not believe it, not until he saw it for himself. He stood at the entrance of the hollow and stared at the scene inside, the carefully constructed insulation, the organized supplies, the people who were cold and hungry but alive, alive when they should have been dead. "How?" he asked Wren. "My mother taught me." It was all she would say, and somehow it was enough. The news spread faster than the storm had. Within hours, everyone in Crestwood knew the Calloway children had not only survived, they had become the only thing standing between 10 people and certain death. The statistics emerged over the following days. 14 people had died in Montana during the Arctic outbreak of December 2019. 3 of them were from Crestwood. An elderly man named Henry Pearson had frozen to death 20 feet from his front door, trying to retrieve firewood in the blinding snow. 2 hikers from out of state had been caught in the mountains without adequate gear. 0 people had died in the hollow tree. 0. Garrett Holbrook gave an interview to the local paper. He stood in front of his damaged house and spoke with the bluntness of a man who had nothing left to hide. "I called those kids grave diggers," he said. "I told everyone they wouldn't make it. I was sitting in my freezing house and they were warm. I walked 2 miles through that storm to beg children for help. Children I had mocked. I was wrong. We were all wrong." The word spread through town like the rumors had spread before, but in reverse. Where there had been doubt, there was now wonder. Where there had been mockery, there was now respect. Deputy Webb closed the investigation into the Calloway children. There was no need to pursue it anymore. Whatever technicalities might have existed, whatever legal arguments might have been made, the fact remained that Wren Calloway had saved more lives in 1 week than most people saved in a lifetime. You do not arrest someone for that. You do not take their dog away for that. You thank them and you leave them alone. Councilwoman Opaline Mercer did not speak publicly about the children. Not at first. She stood at the back of the crowd when the search party returned, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. This was the woman who had drafted paperwork to drag the children out of the forest by force. The woman who had worried about legal liability and town reputation, while 2 orphans were fighting to survive. Now she stood in front of a town hall with half its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of ice that had accumulated during the storm. The building she had worked in for 15 years looked like it might collapse at any moment, and 50 yards away, a hollow tree stood untouched. Someone asked her for a comment. She shook her head once, turned, and walked away. But Wren saw her pause at the edge of the clearing, saw her look back at the ancient oak, saw her nod just once, as if acknowledging something she could not bring herself to say out loud. It was the closest thing to an apology Wren would ever receive from her, and somehow it was enough. A week after the storm, Edna Birchwood came to the hollow tree. She came alone, walking slowly through the snow, her breath forming clouds in the still cold air. Wren saw her coming and went out to meet her. They stood facing each other in the clearing, 2 women separated by more than 50 years, but connected by something neither fully understood. "You did it," Edna said. "You survived. We survived. 10 people, because of you." Wren shook her head. "Because of the tree. Because of what Mum taught me, I just remembered." Edna's eyes were bright, with something that might have been tears. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you from the beginning." Wren waited. 51 years ago, I was 17 years old. I was pregnant and unmarried, and my family had thrown me out. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, no hope for the future. So I came to this forest, to this tree, and I lived here for 3 months, through the worst winter anyone could remember. Wren's heart was pounding, though she could not have said why. The baby was born right here, in this hollow, on the coldest night of the year. I delivered her myself with nothing but a knife and a prayer and the stubborn refusal to let either of us die. Edna's voice broke and she paused to compose herself. I named her Miranda, and 18 years later, when she found me again, when she tracked me down and asked me to teach her everything I knew, I did. I taught her about this tree, about survival, about never giving up. Wren's legs felt weak. "You're saying, I'm your grandmother, Wren. Your mother was born in the same tree where you just saved 10 lives. She was born right where you're standing." The world tilted. Wren reached out and touched the bark of the ancient oak, steadying herself. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't Mum tell me?" "Because I asked her not to. Because I was ashamed. I had given her up for adoption when she was 3 months old. I had let someone else raise her because I was too scared and too young and too broken to do it myself. And when she found me, when she forgave me, I couldn't believe I deserved it. So I asked her to keep my secret, and she did." Edna stepped forward and took Wren's hands in her own. Her grip was surprisingly strong. But she made sure you would find your way back. She made sure you knew about the tree, about the techniques, about everything you needed to survive. She couldn't tell you about me, but she could give you the next best thing. She could give you the knowledge to save yourself. Wren was crying now, tears streaming down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. Finch doesn't know. He doesn't know he has a grandmother. I'd like to tell him, if you'll let me. Edna's voice was barely a whisper. I'd like to be part of your family, if you'll have me. Wren looked at this woman, this stranger who was not a stranger, this grandmother she had never known existed. She thought about all the years of silence, all the secrets, all the pain. Then she thought about her mother, about the map left in a tin box, about the note that said, "If you need help, find Edna Birchwood." Miranda Calloway had known. She had known that someday, somehow, her daughter would need family, and she had made sure that family would be waiting. "Yes," Wren said. "Yes, I'll have you." And in the shadow of the hollow tree, a grandmother embraced her granddaughter, and a family that had been broken for half a century began to heal. Sometimes the people we need most are closer than we realize. They're hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to find them, hoping we'll give them a chance to make things right. Edna Birchwood had lived with her shame for 51 years. She had watched from a distance as her daughter grew up, married, had children, died. She had never introduced herself, never claimed her place, never asked for what she wanted most. And yet, when her granddaughter needed her, she was there. That's the thing about family. It's not always the people we're born to. Sometimes it's the people who show up. Sometimes it's the people who stay. Spring came slowly to Montana. The snow melted in stages, retreating up the mountains like a tide going out. The forest shook off its white blanket and remembered how to be green. Birds returned, filling the air with songs that had been silent for months. And in the hollow tree, life went on, but not the same life as before. Edna Birchwood had a house at the edge of the forest. It was small and old and needed work, but it had walls and a roof and a furnace that worked. She offered it to Wren and Finch without conditions, without paperwork, without any of the complications that had made the official system so terrifying. "Stay as long as you like," she said. "This is your home now, all of you." She meant copper, too. That was the first thing she made clear. The transition was not easy. Wren had grown accustomed to the hollow, to the rhythm of survival, to the daily work of keeping herself and her brother alive. Living in a house with electricity and running water felt strange, almost too simple. She caught herself checking the sky for storms, calculating food supplies, planning for emergencies that never came. Finch adapted faster. He was only 10, still young enough to embrace change without questioning it. He went back to school in January, 3 months behind, but catching up quickly. He made friends. He joined the soccer team. He started to laugh again, really laugh, the way he had laughed before their mother got sick. And he had a grandmother now. That was the biggest change of all. He called her Grandma Edna, and he spent hours listening to her stories about the old days, about surviving in the wilderness, about the mother he barely remembered. She taught him things Wren had not had time to teach: how to carve wood, how to read animal tracks, how to make a fire in the rain. "You have your mother's hands," she told him once, "steady, patient, made for careful work." Finch had smiled at that. It was the first time anyone had told him he was like his mother. The town of Crestwood did not forget. Stories spread. First locally, then regionally, then beyond. A reporter from the state newspaper came to do a feature. A television crew followed. The tale of the 16-year-old girl who had survived a Montana winter in a hollow tree and saved 10 lives became something bigger than itself. They called her the Tree Girl, the survivor, the miracle of Crestwood. Wren hated all of it. She did not want fame. She did not want attention. She wanted what she had always wanted: her family together, her brother safe, her dog alive. She got all of it. Jonas Reinholdt became an unlikely teacher after the storm. The quiet Norwegian logger who had left gifts at the edge of the clearing now found himself surrounded by young people who wanted to learn. He taught weekend classes in wilderness survival, passing down the techniques his grandmother had taught him, the same techniques he had recognized in Wren's work. The old ways are not primitive, he told his students. They are proven. They have been tested by centuries of winters far worse than anything we will see. Learn them, remember them, and teach them to your children. By the spring of 2020, 14 families in Crestwood had built emergency shelters using traditional Scandinavian methods. By 2022, the number had grown to 40. The knowledge that had nearly been lost was spreading again, one student at a time. Wren sometimes attended his classes standing at the back, watching. She never spoke. She did not need to. Jonas would catch her eye and nod, a silent acknowledgement between two people who understood the same truths. On a spring afternoon, as the last of the snow melted from the branches of the ancient oak, the town council held a ceremony. They had commissioned a small brass plaque, which they affixed to a post at the edge of the clearing. The Callaway Oak. This tree provided shelter during the Arctic outbreak of December 2019, saving the lives of 10 people. It stands as a testament to the power of knowledge passed down through generations, and to the courage of Wren and Finch Callaway, who proved that shelter is not about walls, but about the will to survive. Garrett Holbrook spoke at the ceremony. He stood in front of the plaque with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the ground, and he said words that everyone in Crestwood would remember for years to come. I owe my life to these children. I owe my life to a girl I called foolish and a boy I bet would die. I was wrong about them. I was wrong about everything, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance they gave me. He did not mention the money. He did not mention the mockery. He did not need to. Everyone knew. Beckett Tanner was there too. He had gotten a job at the Forestry Service after the storm, inspired by what he had seen in the hollow tree. He was learning about wilderness survival, about traditional building techniques, about all the things he had dismissed as useless before the cold taught him otherwise. He walked up to Wren after the ceremony and held out his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting me die." She shook his hand. "Try not to need saving again." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh without cruelty in it. Councilwoman Opaline Mercer stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She still had not spoken publicly about what had happened, but she had quietly withdrawn the paperwork she had drafted. She had quietly recommended that the county provide support to Edna Birchwood's household without investigation or intervention. She had quietly made sure that no one would ever try to take those children away from the family they had finally found. It was not an apology, but it was something. Years passed. Wren graduated from high school, then went to college. She studied forestry and environmental science. learning the academic names for things her mother had taught her by feel and instinct. She became an expert in traditional building techniques, in the ways that people had survived for thousands of years before electricity and central heating made everything easy. She wrote a paper about the hollow tree. It was published in a scientific journal with photographs and measurements and detailed analysis of how a natural structure could provide such effective insulation. Other scientists read it, other students cited it. The knowledge that Miranda Calloway had passed to her daughter was now passing to the world. Finch grew up. He was 15 when Copper died, old and peaceful and surrounded by the people he loved. They buried him in the clearing near the hollow tree with a stone to mark the spot. Here lies Copper, a good dog. He kept us warm when the world was cold. Finch cried for 3 days. Then he adopted another dog from the shelter, a scrappy mutt with one ear that never stood quite straight. He named her Ember. Edna Birchwood lived 4 more good years after the storm. She slowed down the way Copper had slowed down, gradually and then suddenly. But she never lost her sharpness, never lost her stories, never lost her determination to be part of the family she had abandoned so long ago. She died on a winter night in 2023 with Wren and Finch beside her, holding her hands the way Wren had held Miranda's hands years before. Her last words were simple. "Thank you for letting me come home." They buried her next to Copper, in the clearing, in the shadow of the tree that had saved them all. On a spring morning in 2024, Wren Calloway stood at the entrance of the hollow tree with her brother beside her. She was 21 now, finished with college, working for the Montana Department of Natural Resources. Finch was 15, taller than her, still growing into the man he would become. Ember sat between them, tail wagging, nose working at the smells of the forest. The tree looked the same as it always had, ancient, scarred, indomitable. Wren reached out and touched the bark. Beneath her fingers she could feel the grooves that had been carved there over the years. First, in 1968, E.B. Then, years later, added by a young woman who had found her mother and learned her secrets, M.C. And finally, carved on a winter night when the world was falling apart, W.C. plus F.C. 2019. "Do you think about it much?" Finch asked. "That winter, every day. Does it get easier?" Wren considered the question. No, but it changes. It becomes less about the fear and more about what we learned, about who we became. Finch nodded slowly. He had grown so much since those desperate days in the hollow, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. He was confident now, capable, ready for whatever the world might throw at him. "I want to bring my kids here someday," he said. "When I have them, I want to show them the tree and tell them the story." Wren smiled. "Mum would like that. So would Grandma." They stood together in the clearing, the tree rising above them, the forest stretching out around them, the sky open and blue and full of possibility. "Ready to go?" Finch asked. "In a minute." Wren pressed her palm flat against the bark, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath her skin. So many lives had passed through this place. So many stories had begun and ended within these ancient walls. And now, her story was part of it too. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The tree did not answer. Trees never do. But a breeze stirred the branches above, and somewhere in the forest a bird began to sing. and Wren Calloway walked away from the hollow that had saved her life, knowing that she would always carry it with her. And now, as we come to the end of this story, I want to leave you with one final thought. Shelter is not about walls. It's not about roofs or heating bills or square footage. Shelter is what we build with the people we refuse to leave behind. It's the knowledge we pass down and the love we carry forward. It's the door we open when someone is freezing, even if that someone once laughed at us. Wren Calloway survived a Montana winter in a hollow tree. But that's not really what this story is about. This story is about a mother who taught her daughter to be strong, a grandmother who found her way home, a brother who learned to trust, and a community that discovered in the darkest hour that the people they had overlooked were the ones who would save them. If you're going through something hard right now, if you're facing a door that's just closed, remember this: you are stronger than you know. You have more inside you than anyone suspects, and somewhere out there, there's a shelter waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to find it. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about survival, about family, or about the shelters we build in our lives, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week, stories about ordinary people who refused to give up, about knowledge passed down through generations, about the light we find in the darkest places. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the next story. Because somewhere out there right now, someone is standing at the edge of the forest with nothing but hope and a reason to keep going. And their story is just beginning. The end.